I'm Reed Parker, a high school science teacher who survived the first 100 days of the Ice Age apocalypse. When volcanic winter plunged our world into lethal cold, my knowledge of thermodynamics kept me and my students alive while civilization collapsed around us. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 48 hours. People I taught alongside for years became enemies overnight. This is how science saved us when the world froze. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. I never thought my obsession with climate science would save my life. What I'm about to tell you isn't pretty, but it's how I survived the first 100 days when our world froze. Over. My name is Reed Parker, and 3 months ago I was just a high school science teacher in suburban Minneapolis, with a mortgage, a cat named Tesla, and a classroom full of teenagers who couldn't care less about atmospheric pressure systems. 3 months before everything collapsed, I showed my students satellite imagery of unusual Arctic air patterns. They were too busy watching TikToks to notice. Those patterns were the first warning, but nobody was listening, not even me, really. I pointed them out because it was in the curriculum, not because I thought they were the first tremors of an extinction-level event. I remember the exact moment everything changed. Second period Earth Sciences discussing Milankovitch cycles and how they related to historical ice ages. Casey Williams had just asked if we were due for another ice age, and I gave my standard answer. Not for thousands of years, and even then the process would be gradual. I was wrong on both counts. The emergency alert sounded on every phone simultaneously. The principal made an announcement to continue classes normally while they assessed the situation. But when the classroom TV automatically switched to emergency broadcasting, we saw it. Massive plumes erupting from volcanoes across the Pacific. Not one, but 3 major eruptions happening almost simultaneously. Indonesia, Chile, and the Philippines. All part of the Ring of Fire, all spewing ash miles into the atmosphere. The students were excited at first. A global catastrophe meant no finals, right? But I pulled up the classroom's weather modeling software and calculated the potential ash dispersion. The simulation made my blood run cold. I knew we had hours, not days, to prepare. Against direct orders, I dismissed my class and told them to go home immediately, to tell their parents to stock up on food, water, and cold weather supplies. Most students laughed it off. A few gave me concerned looks, probably thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. Only 3 took me seriously. Mia Chen, a brilliant senior who'd already been accepted to MIT, Tyler Rodriguez, a sophomore who'd failed my class twice but could fix anything mechanical, and Ellie Washington, a quiet junior whose father was an EMT. They stayed behind as the others filed out. Mr. Parker, my parents are both traveling for work, Mia said. They're in Singapore. My mom's shift at the hospital doesn't end until 10, added Ellie. Tyler just shrugged. Foster home. They're not going to stock up on anything for me. I made a decision that would determine all our fates. Come with me. Now. We took my Subaru to my house first. My colleagues had always teased me about my emergency supplies. Parker's ready for the zombie apocalypse, they'd joke when they saw my basement storage. I'd always smiled politely, never telling them it wasn't zombies I was preparing for. It was this. Climate catastrophe. I just never imagined it would happen so quickly. Within 2 hours, the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. By nightfall, another 15. Reports came in of air traffic grounded worldwide as ash clouds spread with terrifying speed. Internet became spotty, then cellular networks began to fail. We made a few frantic calls, the kids to their families, me to my sister in Boston, before communications collapsed entirely. By day 3, the temperature had plummeted nearly 30 degrees from normal. Snow began falling despite it being September. The grocery store shelves were bare except for ketchup and diet soda. Funny what people don't grab when they're panicking. The gas stations ran dry, ATMs stopped working, and still the temperature kept dropping. I converted my basement into a livable space using every scientific principle I knew about insulation and heat retention. We sealed off most of the house, focusing on maintaining one small area at sustainable temperatures. The kids showed remarkable adaptability. Mia calculated our calorie needs and developed a rationing plan. Tyler figured out how to modify my camping stoves to burn alternative fuels when propane ran low. Ellie organized our medical supplies and began learning basic first aid from a manual I had. By day 6, the snow was 2 feet deep and still falling. The power grid failed completely. We could see our breath even in the basement. That's when the neighbors started coming over. First the Garcias from across the street. He was former military, and she had practical skills from growing up on a farm. Then the elderly Wilsons from next door who couldn't maintain heat in their home. The Chen siblings, distant relatives of Mia, who had been visiting from Chicago when everything happened. And then there was Thaddeus Bellwether. Nobody knew much about him before. He lived alone at the end of the cul-de-sac in a house with few windows and a surprisingly small carbon footprint according to neighborhood gossip. He was the last to join our community meetings, and even then he shared little, listening more than talking. But I noticed something others didn't. His hands weren't chapped like ours. Somehow he wasn't suffering from the cold like the rest of us. We established a neighborhood coalition out of necessity. 12 houses, 37 people. We created a watch rotation, pooled resources, and set up a communication system using modified ham radios when we discovered one of the Garcias had the equipment. The temperature continued to plummet, reaching -30 by day 10. It became clear that our survival depended on cooperation. Sometimes at night I'd catch glimpses of lights in Bellwether's basement windows. Not the flicker of candles like the rest of us. Steady electrical light. How was that possible when the grid had been down for weeks? When I asked him about it at a community meeting, he deflected, mentioning something vague about a small generator for emergencies. But the math didn't add up. Fuel wouldn't last this long unless he had a massive underground tank, and city regulations would never have permitted that. On day 15, we had our first casualty. Mr. Wilson didn't wake up. The temperature had hit -40 overnight, and despite our best efforts to insulate their sleeping area, his elderly heart simply couldn't handle the cold. Mrs. Wilson didn't cry. She just sat holding his hand until we gently led her away, so some of the stronger men could take his body outside. There was no way to dig a grave in the frozen ground. I don't think any of us want to remember what we had to do instead. The loss hit us all hard. It made the situation real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't a temporary emergency that would soon be resolved. This was our new reality. Some broke down. Others became more determined. The group dynamics shifted. Questions about resource distribution became more pointed. Who deserved more food? The young? Those doing physical labor? Those with specialized knowledge? That's when things started to fracture. Day 16, I woke to raised voices upstairs. Dr. Hammond had arrived with a group from the school. Fellow teachers, administrative staff, and their families. Hammond had been the assistant principal, and he immediately challenged the leadership structure we'd established. He spoke with authority about proper protocols and chain of command. Many deferred to him automatically. The habit of respecting educational hierarchy was still strong. But I watched him carefully. He talked about rational resource allocation, but his eyes kept darting to our supply closet. He spoke of shared sacrifice, but his group had brought almost nothing to contribute. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next few days. Hammond began implementing stricter controls, citing his former position as justification. When I pointed out that his administrative experience didn't qualify him to make scientific decisions about our survival, he pulled me aside. "Parker," he said, "you need to understand something. The ones who will survive this aren't the strongest. They're the ones who understand thermodynamics." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's why you're valuable, and why you should be careful about challenging me publicly." It wasn't a direct threat, but the implication was clear. My knowledge made me useful, but not irreplaceable. Not if I became a problem. I began keeping my scientific insights more to myself, sharing them only with my original group of students and a few trusted others. We developed alternative heating methods in secret. I taught them about convection, insulation, and the physics of heat transfer. We experimented with passive solar collection, despite the minimal sunlight filtering through the ash-filled sky. By day 20, the temperature seemed to stabilize around -45. Not because it was getting warmer, but because we couldn't measure any colder with the equipment we had. We received reports from the ham radio, garbled and full of static, about armed groups moving out from the city core, searching for supplies and shelter. Garcia organized a defensive perimeter. We took inventory of weapons, a few hunting rifles, Garcia's service pistol, some improvised weapons. I stood watch that night with Tyler scanning the white wasteland that had once been our suburb. The moonlight reflected off the snow, creating an eerie false daylight. In the distance, we could see the glow of fires in the city. Not electrical, light. Fires meant wood, gasoline, or worse. "Mr. Parker," Tyler whispered, "those people coming from the city, they're going to want what we have, aren't they?" I nodded, not wanting to lie to him. "And we can't help them all." "No," I said, "we can't." We stood in silence, watching our breath form ice crystals in the air. In the distance, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Figures moving deliberately through the snow several blocks away. My hand tightened on the baseball bat I'd been given for protection. The figures moved with purpose, checking houses systematically. "They're coming," I said quietly, "and they're organized." As the dark figures moved closer house by house, I noticed something that sent a chill through me deeper than any cold. They weren't just random looters. They moved with military precision, communicated with hand signals, and carried matching equipment. This wasn't desperation. This was methodical. And somehow, watching them coordinate their movements with practiced efficiency, I knew our neighborhood's fragile peace was about to end. Hammond's politics and Bellwether's secrets wouldn't matter much longer. Something worse was coming for us all. The organized group moved past our neighborhood that night, but they left us all shaken. The close call accelerated the fracturing of our community. By morning, Hammond had called an emergency meeting in the Garcia's living room, which had become our de facto community center. "We need to consolidate resources," Hammond announced, standing before the group with his arms crossed. "Individual stockpiles are inefficient. Everything should be centralized under proper administration." What he meant, of course, was under his administration. Several families nodded in agreement, but I saw the Garcia family exchange glances. They had military experience and understood what centralized control really meant. "And where exactly would these supplies be kept?" Mrs. Garcia asked, her voice deliberately neutral. "The school has the most secure facilities," Hammond replied without hesitation. "My team has maintained access." This was news to everyone. The school had been declared off-limits due to its distance and exposure. If Hammond had been going there, secretly, what else had he been doing without the group's knowledge? I raised my hand like I was still in a faculty meeting. Old habits. "The school is a quarter-mile from here. Moving supplies in this cold would risk frostbite, and the building has too many windows to heat efficiently." Hammond's smile tightened. "We've established proper insulation in the administrative section, and I'm sure your students would volunteer to help with transport, right, Parker?" The way he looked at Mia, Tyler, and Ellie made my skin crawl. They weren't students anymore. They were labor, resources. The debate grew heated. The Wilson family, the Chen siblings, and the Garcias sided with my position that distributed resources with shared oversight made more sense. Hammond's faction, now nearly half the group, insisted on centralization. By the end of the meeting, no consensus had been reached, but something fundamental had changed. We were no longer a neighborhood. We were opposing factions. That night, I converted 7 space heaters to run on cooking oil. Hammond somehow found out and confiscated 5 of them for leadership use. That's when I knew our community had an expiration date. By day 23, temperatures briefly rose to -35, which felt almost warm after what we'd endured. The temporary break in extreme cold gave us a chance to address our growing water crisis. Melting snow required precious fuel, and our supplies were running low. I gathered my students and a few trusted others in my basement to work on solutions. Water has a high specific heat capacity, I explained, falling into teacher mode. It takes a lot of energy to change its temperature, but we can use passive solar collection even with minimal sunlight. We constructed black painted collection, trays that could be placed in the sunniest spots during daylight hours. Even through the ash clouds, enough solar radiation reached us to melt small amounts of snow without using fuel. It wasn't much, but it helped extend our supplies. Tyler proved to be the most innovative of the group. The kid who had failed my class twice was suddenly teaching me thermodynamics applications I'd never considered. What if we use car batteries to power small heating elements? He suggested one evening. There are dozens of abandoned cars in the neighborhood. Their engines are useless now, but the batteries still have charge. We tested his theory the next day, salvaging batteries from cars buried in snowdrifts. It worked, providing enough power to run small heating elements that could melt snow or heat small spaces for short periods. When Hammond learned of our success, he demanded we turn over the batteries. This time, we lied and said most had been drained already. The division in our community grew more pronounced each day. People began to hoard supplies privately despite the agreements we'd made. Trust eroded as quickly as our food stores. And through it all, I kept noticing oddities about Bellwether's behavior. He attended community meetings but shared little. He contributed to group needs but never seemed to need anything himself. And sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard the hum of electrical equipment coming from his house when everyone else was using candles and oil lamps. On day 33, everything changed again. A family of 4 appeared at the edge of our neighborhood, parents with 2 young children, all severely frostbitten and near starvation. They had been traveling for days after their own neighborhood had been raided. The mother, I soon discovered, was Dr. Andrea Nichols, a climatologist from the university. The community debate about whether to take them in was ugly. Hammond argued that our resources couldn't support more people. The Garcias in my group argued that turning them away would be a death sentence. In the end, the family was allowed to stay, but with reduced rations, a compromise that satisfied no one. That night, Dr. Nichols shared information that kept me awake for 2 straight days. The volcanic winter should have been temporary, she told me quietly as we huddled near one of our makeshift heaters. 6 months of cooling, a year at most. But the patterns we were seeing before communications failed were unprecedented. The ash cloud was behaving in ways that defied our models. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying this isn't just a volcanic winter. Something else is affecting global weather patterns. And whatever it isn't natural." Her words haunted me. If this catastrophe wasn't following natural patterns, what did that mean for our chances of survival? How long would this frozen hell last? Meanwhile, tensions with Hammond's faction continued to escalate. On day 35, we received intelligence via ham radio about organized groups systematically looting suburbs, moving outward from the city center. The description matched the organized figures we'd seen days earlier. Garcia established a watch rotation as the temperature briefly stabilized at -35. Everyone capable of standing watch was assigned shifts, even the teenagers. I was paired with Bellwether one evening, which gave me the opportunity I'd been waiting for. "Your lights," I said without preamble. "How do you have consistent electricity?" He stared at me for a long moment, his breath forming ice crystals in his beard. "You're observant, Parker. Most people are too focused on their own survival to notice details. I'm a science teacher. Observation is my job." He almost smiled. "Was your job. Still is. I'm teaching those kids how to apply scientific principles to stay alive. That's more real-world education than they ever got in my classroom." Bellwether nodded thoughtfully. "To answer your question, geothermal. I installed a small system before all this happened. It's not powerful, but it's consistent." The explanation made sense, but didn't fully align with city building codes I was familiar with. Before I could press further, movement in the distance caught our attention. More figures moving through the frozen streets. We alerted the others, but like before, the group passed us by, perhaps saving us for a future visit. On day 38, the other shoe finally dropped. Tyler caught Hammond and two of his closest allies loading supplies into insulated containers at 3 in the morning. They were planning to leave, taking the community's food stores with them. Garcia confronted Hammond at the next morning's meeting. The resulting argument divided the community into open conflict. People I'd known for years, colleagues I'd shared lunch with every day, were suddenly looking at me like I was either a resource or an obstacle. Nothing in between. Hammond didn't deny the planned departure, he simply reframed it. The school facility is more sustainable. We've been preparing it as a backup. Anyone who wants to join us can, but we can only support those who contribute. His eyes lingered meaningfully on my students. Their skills had become obvious to everyone. His message was clear. They were invited. I was not. Neither Mia, Tyler, nor Ellie even considered his offer. Their loyalty humbled me. We'd formed a family of sorts, bound by shared hardship and mutual respect. That night, Bellwether approached our group as we huddled in my basement. "Hammond is planning something beyond just leaving," he said without prelude. "I overheard him on a radio last night. He wasn't using the community channel." "Who was he talking to?" Garcia asked. "Don't know, but he mentioned acquisition targets and technical personnel extraction, military terminology." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "He's working with someone outside the neighborhood." Bellwether nodded grimly. "And whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." For the next few days, our faction maintained constant vigilance. We redistributed our remaining supplies among multiple hiding places. We developed contingency plans, escape routes, rally points. All the while, the temperature outside remained lethal, limiting our options. On day 41, the first violent conflict erupted when someone broke into the Garcia family's food storage. We never confirmed who, but the timing was suspicious. While everyone was distracted by the theft, Hammond's faction moved significant community medical supplies to the school. When confronted, they claimed they were securing them from future theft. The community was balanced on a knife's edge. We all knew the fragile peace wouldn't last, but nobody wanted to be the first to shatter it completely. We went to sleep that night knowing something had to break soon. It happened on day 42. The attack came at dawn. Not from Hammond, from outside. The organized group we'd spotted earlier returned in force. 20 or 30 figures in white cold-weather gear, moving with military precision through the neighborhood. They breached the Garcia's house first, then the Chen's. I was woken by Ellie shaking my shoulder frantically. "They're here," she whispered. "Lots of them." I gathered my students and Mrs. Wilson, who had been staying with us since her husband's death. We grabbed our go-bags, emergency supplies we'd prepared for exactly this scenario. Through the basement window, I saw Hammond and his faction fleeing toward the school, abandoning the defense of the neighborhood entirely. They'd known this was coming. We had no chance of fighting. Our only option was escape. I led our small group through the back door and into the yard. The snow was waist-deep in places, making movement slow and exhausting. We cut through yards using fences and garden sheds as cover. The attackers weren't just looking for supplies. I heard them calling out specific names. "Find the teacher," one shouted. "Engineering background, priority 2. They were hunting people with specific skills. We hid in the skeleton of an old treehouse as a patrol passed below us. Their equipment was too standardized, too new to be scavenged. Whoever these people were, they had significant resources and organization behind them. "We need to reach the woods beyond the subdivision," I whispered to the others. "We can lose them in the trees." We made it 3 more houses before we were spotted. 2 figures in white broke away from a search team and began pursuing us. Garcia, who had joined us during our flight, turned to hold them off. "Keep going," he said, raising his pistol. "I'll catch up." We all knew he wouldn't. The sound of gunfire followed us as we fled through frozen backyards. Mrs. Wilson was struggling, her breathing labored, her pace slowing. Tyler and I half carried her between us. Behind us, the neighborhood, our home for weeks, was being systematically dismantled by the raiders. We were huddled in a garden shed, watching our community burn despite the freezing cold. when Tyler leaned against what looked like a regular basement window. To our shock, it swung inward like a door. Below, Bellwether was waiting with a raised shotgun, and behind him something impossible, growing plants. "Get in," he hissed, "before they see you." We descended one by one into what appeared to be a tunnel connecting to Bellwether's basement. The temperature inside was dramatically warmer than outside. Not room temperature, but warm enough that my frozen fingers began to ache as they thawed. He secured the hidden entrance behind us and led us through the tunnel. "What is this place?" Mia asked, staring at the construction in amazement. "Insurance policy," Bellwether replied cryptically. "Keep moving." The tunnel opened into Bellwether's basement, but it was unlike anything I could have imagined. The space had been expanded far beyond the foundation of the house above. Specialized LED lights illuminated rows of plants growing in a sophisticated hydroponic system. Computer equipment hummed along one wall. Pipes carrying water and, presumably, heat ran throughout the space. But most shocking of all was the consistent temperature. After weeks of freezing, it felt like stepping into another world. My skin actually hurt as it thawed. "You've had this the entire time?" Ellie asked, her voice somewhere between awe and accusation. Bellwether secured several heavy locks on the entrance before answering. "Yes." "Why didn't you help the others?" Mrs. Wilson asked, her voice breaking. Bellwether's expression remained impassive. "This system can support 6 people at maximum efficiency. There were 37 in the neighborhood." The cold calculation in his voice chilled me more than the outside air had. But before I could respond, he continued. "And I needed to be selective about who knew this existed. Those raiders out there aren't random looters. They're part of an organized acquisition force gathering people with specific technical knowledge." "Acquisition?" Tyler asked. "They don't want to kill people, like you and Parker," Bellwether explained. "They want to collect you, use your skills. One of the raiders had a list, actual paper with names. I saw your name on it with Priority 2 written beside it," he said, nodding to me. "What was Priority 1? I asked, dreading the answer. Bellwether's expression darkened. Me. Bellwether's underground setup was like stepping into a different world. After weeks of seeing nothing but white and gray, the green of growing plants was almost shocking to the eye. The temperature inside his bunker was a consistent 68 degrees. After weeks of freezing, it felt like stepping into another world. My skin actually hurt as it thawed. "You need to explain," I said once we had all caught our breath. "All of it now." Bellwether moved around the space, checking monitors and adjusting settings on equipment I didn't recognize. He seemed reluctant to begin, perhaps calculating how much to reveal. "I worked for the Department of Energy," he finally said. "Climate Systems Engineering, specialized in closed-loop sustainability modeling." "That's why you knew about the geothermal system," I said. "I didn't just know about it, I designed it." He gestured to the complex arrangement of pipes and pumps. "This is a prototype of a system intended for remote research stations in extreme environments. I was permitted to install it at my residence for long-term testing." "So the government knows about this place?" Tyler asked, looking nervously at the ceiling as if expecting raiders to burst through at any moment. "They did. Whether anyone in authority remembers now is another question." Bellwether checked readings on a tablet. The volcanic eruptions weren't in any of our disaster models, at least not 3 simultaneously. The space was roughly divided into 3 sections. The central area contained the hydroponic system with vegetables growing under specialized lights. One side held living quarters with cots, storage, and what appeared to be a water recycling system. The other side was dedicated to technical equipment, computers, and monitoring systems. "How long have you been preparing for this?" Mrs. Wilson asked, still staring at the growing plants with something like reverence. "This facility wasn't designed for this specific scenario," Bellwether replied. "It was a test bed for sustainability technologies. The fact that it's keeping us alive now is incidental." "Incidental or not, you could have saved more people," Ellie said, her voice tight with emotion. Bellwether's expression didn't change. This system can support 6 people at maximum efficiency for approximately 6 months. If I had opened it to the neighborhood, we would have exhausted the resources in weeks and everyone would have died anyway. His cold calculation was disturbing, but I couldn't argue with the logic. Triage was a brutal reality in disaster scenarios. Still, knowing he had been living in relative comfort while others froze to death in his neighborhood was hard to stomach. The raiders, I prompted, changing the subject. You said they were specifically looking for people with technical knowledge. How do you know that? Because I helped design their personnel acquisition protocols. Bellwether's admission landed like a physical blow. Not for this scenario specifically, but for similar contingencies. Critical personnel recovery during infrastructure collapse. You're working with them? Tyler moved slightly away, his posture turning defensive. No, Bellwether said firmly. I designed systems that are now being misused. There's a difference. Who are they? I pressed. They call themselves the Collectors now. They're a privatized offshoot of a government contingency program. When centralized authority collapsed, they maintained their organization and redirected their mission. They're gathering people with specific skill sets to rebuild infrastructure, but under private control. So they're the good guys? Ellie asked skeptically. There are no good guys anymore, Bellwether replied. Just different visions of what comes after. I processed this information while examining the hydroponic system. Despite the circumstances, the scientist in me couldn't help but appreciate the elegant design. Nutrient delivery was automated, lighting was precisely calibrated, and water recirculation was nearly 100% efficient. This system, I said, tracing a pipe with my finger. It's beautiful work, but there's a flaw in the biological filtration component. You're getting mineral buildup in these joints. Bellwether looked surprised for the first time. You know hydroponics? I ran a classroom aquaponics project for years, smaller scale, but same principles. I pointed to a slight discoloration in the water. Your nitrogen cycle is imbalanced, too many nitrates building up. You need more anaerobic bacteria here. For several moments, Bellwether just stared at me. Then something shifted in his expression, a subtle relaxation, a hint of respect. Perhaps you should take a look at the filtration system, he said, gesturing toward a panel on the wall. That moment marked a turning point. Bellwether had created the tools and systems, but he was missing something crucial: diverse scientific perspectives. When Mia showed him how her mathematical models could optimize his power usage by 23%, I saw the moment he decided we could stay. Over the next few days, we fell into a cautious routine. Bellwether maintained his equipment while I worked with the students to improve various systems. Mrs. Wilson revealed an unexpected background in botany, earning her place by identifying inefficiencies in the plant rotation schedule. Bellwether had created a closed-loop water recycling system that would have won Nobel Prizes in the old world. But it was failing because he didn't understand the biological filtration components. That's where my classroom aquaponics project knowledge saved us all. For the first time in weeks, we ate a real meal, fresh vegetables grown right in front of us. It wasn't much by pre-disaster standards, but after subsisting on dried and canned foods, it felt like a feast. The collaboration wasn't without tension. Bellwether had lived alone for years and clearly struggled with sharing his space. He had established strict protocols for everything from water usage to waste disposal. Some made scientific sense, others seemed arbitrary and controlling. Arguments erupted over small issues that wouldn't have mattered in the world before. On day 54, everything changed again. Ellie developed a harsh, racking cough. By that evening, she was burning with fever. By morning, her breathing was labored and painful to hear. Pneumonia, Mrs. Wilson said after examining her. She had worked as a school nurse before retirement, giving her the most medical knowledge among us. She needs antibiotics. We had basic medications in our emergency kits, but nothing strong enough for a serious infection. Bellwether's supplies were similarly limited, focused more on sustainability than medical emergencies. I taught the respiratory system for years using plastic models and diagrams. Now, watching Ellie struggle for each breath, those academic lessons became terrifyingly real. We elevated her upper body to ease breathing, kept her hydrated, and used dampened cloths to manage the fever. But without antibiotics, her condition would only worsen. "There's a pharmacy 5 miles east," Tyler said on day 57 as we watched Ellie's condition deteriorate. "I passed it when my foster family evacuated. If it hasn't been completely looted, there might be medications left. 5 miles in those temperatures?" Mrs. Wilson shook her head. "You'd never make it back." "We have to try," I said. "Ellie won't last much longer without treatment." Bellwether had been silent during the conversation, monitoring systems on his tablet. Now he looked up. "The collectors will still be in the area. They sweep methodically through sectors before moving on. All the more reason to go now before they strip everything valuable," I argued. Bellwether considered for a moment, then set down his tablet. "I have cold weather gear designed for extreme environments. Prototype thermal regulation. It would give you approximately 4 hours of exposure protection." "You're not coming?" Mia asked. "Someone needs to maintain the systems and protect this location." He met my eyes. "Parker should go. He knows medications. Tyler, too, for mechanical problems. Mia stays to help me with calculations. Mrs. Wilson stays with Ellie." I didn't like taking orders, but the logic was sound. "We'll need a sled to transport supplies back." "Already have one. Emergency extraction equipment." Of course he did. The next day, Tyler and I prepared for the expedition. Bellwether's cold weather gear was unlike anything I'd seen before, multi-layered with integrated heating elements powered by flexible batteries. It wasn't bulky like traditional Arctic gear, allowing for better mobility. These were developed for special forces operating in extreme environments, Bellwether explained as he helped us suit up. "Battery life is approximately 6 hours at this temperature. The return trip will be close." He provided us with detailed maps showing the fastest route to the pharmacy, accounting for snow depth and obstacles. The preparation was meticulous, military in its precision. As we prepared to leave through a secondary exit tunnel, Bellwether handed me a small device. "Emergency beacon. One-time use. Activated only in absolute emergency. It will bring the collectors down on all of us, but it might save your lives if you're trapped." The implicit trust in that gesture wasn't lost on me. He was giving us the power to expose his hidden sanctuary if necessary. We emerged into the frozen wasteland 100 yards from Bellwether's house, far enough away to avoid leading anyone back to the entrance. The temperature outside was brutal after days in the relative warmth of the bunker. Despite the advanced gear, I felt the cold immediately trying to seep in. The landscape was completely transformed. Familiar streets buried under feet of snow, houses partially collapsed under the weight of accumulated ice, abandoned vehicles transformed into shapeless lumps. Navigation required constant reference to landmarks that barely protruded from the white expanse. "Stay alert," I told Tyler as we trudged through the snow, pulling our empty sled. The collectors could still be operating in the area. The journey was grueling. What would have been a 15-minute drive before the disaster took us nearly 2 hours of exhausting effort. We moved as quickly as the conditions allowed, following Bellwether's route between buildings and through yards to minimize our exposure. Halfway there, we came across an entire field of cars frozen in what must have been a mass exodus from the city. Hundreds of vehicles, most still containing remains. It was Interstate 35, completely unrecognizable except for fragments of green, signs protruding from snowdrifts. "Don't look," I told Tyler when he paused beside a minivan with shadowy figures visible through ice-covered windows. "Keep moving." The pharmacy, when we finally reached it, was partially collapsed on one side, but the main entrance was accessible. The glass doors had been shattered long ago, and snow had drifted inside. The interior was dark, display shelves toppled and emptied by previous scavengers. "The good stuff will be behind the pharmacy counter," I said. "Let's move quickly." We made our way to the back of the store, where the prescription area was located. To my surprise, while the displays of common medications had been thoroughly looted, many of the prescription medications remained untouched. Looters had taken painkillers and recognizable brands, but left many critical medications they didn't recognize. Grab anything ending in psyllin or mycin, I instructed Tyler. Those are antibiotics. Also look for antipyretics, fever reducers. We worked quickly, filling our backpacks with medications that might help Ellie and others we might encounter in the future. While Tyler gathered prescription medications, I checked the storage room, finding additional supplies that had been overlooked. That's when I found a weather service printout dated from just before communications failed. The projected patterns didn't match what a volcanic winter should create. Something else was affecting our climate, something the models hadn't accounted for. I pocketed the paper, intending to show it to Bellwether later. As I rejoined Tyler, I heard voices outside, the methodical communication of a team sweeping the area. "Hide," I whispered, pulling Tyler behind a collapsed shelving unit. Through a broken window I saw them, 6 figures in white cold weather gear, moving with tactical precision as they approached the pharmacy. Unlike desperate survivors, they moved with purpose and coordination, each checking specific areas as part of a practiced routine. They weren't just random looters, I whispered to Tyler. They wore matching insulated uniforms, carried standardized equipment, and used military hand signals. When they searched the pharmacy, they ignored the narcotics and went straight for antibiotics and technical manuals. These weren't opportunists, they were following a plan. We remained hidden as 2 collectors entered the pharmacy, systematically checking aisles and storage areas. They paid particular attention to the pharmacy section, gathering specific medications and placing them in standardized containers. "Team 3 to Northern Command," one said into a radio. "Sector 12 pharmacy cleared. Minimum viable recovered. No sign of priority acquisitions in this sector." "Copy Team 3, came the reply. "Proceed to next waypoint. New information suggests target personnel may be traveling northeast toward the Interstate 35 corridor." "Copy. Team 3 moving to I-35 corridor." They were hunting people, specific people. As they finished their sweep and departed, Tyler and I remained hidden, waiting to ensure they were truly gone before moving. "They're after Bellwether," Tyler whispered. "And maybe us too." "They mentioned Northern Command," I replied. "That suggests there's a larger organization with established bases. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet." Once certain the collectors had moved on, we quickly finished gathering supplies and prepared for the return journey. The trip back would be even more dangerous now that we knew collectors were actively patrolling the area. As we made our way back, pulling our now laden sled, I kept reviewing what I'd overheard. Northern Command, priority acquisitions, the military precision of their operation. None of it aligned with the chaotic collapse of society I had expected. Something more organized was happening beneath the surface of this disaster. We were about halfway back when Tyler spotted a collector patrol in the distance, moving parallel to our route. We took cover behind the remains of a collapsed garage, watching as the team methodically checked houses along the street. "They're being thorough," I whispered, "like they expect to find something specific." "Or someone," Tyler added. We altered our route, adding time but reducing our chance of encounter. The batteries in our thermal gear were draining faster than anticipated due to the extreme cold, and I could feel the chill beginning to seep through in places. When we finally reached the hidden entrance to Bellwether's bunker, we were exhausted and dangerously cold. Bellwether met us at the inner door, quickly assessing our condition and the supplies we'd recovered. "Collectors?" he asked simply. "They're everywhere," I confirmed. "Organized search patterns. They mentioned Northern Command and I-35. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps fear. He helped us remove the freezing gear and bring the supplies inside. Ellie's condition had worsened during our absence. Her breathing was labored, her skin flushed with fever. Mrs. Wilson had been monitoring her vital signs as best she could with limited equipment. "Her pulse is rapid and her oxygen levels are dropping," she reported. "If she doesn't get treatment soon..." I immediately sorted through the antibiotics we'd recovered, identifying ones appropriate for severe respiratory infections. With Mrs. Wilson's guidance, we administered the first dose along with fever reducers and set up a schedule for continued treatment. As we worked to save Ellie, I noticed Bellwether had withdrawn to his communications equipment, checking frequencies with unusual intensity. He seemed disturbed by the information about Northern Command, though he hadn't explained why. That night, as the others slept, I approached him at his workstation. "What's Northern Command?" I asked directly. "You recognized it when I mentioned it earlier." He continued adjusting his equipment without looking up. "It was supposed to be a contingency facility, research and continuity of government in case of catastrophic events. Like 3 simultaneous volcanic eruptions, among other scenarios. And now?" He finally met my eyes. "Now it's something else. The fact that they're operating openly as collectors suggests the command structure has been compromised." "Compromised how?" "Privatized. Restructured with different priorities." He hesitated, then added, "During Ellie's final hours, Bellwether muttered something about Protocol 7 and the Northern facility. When I asked him later, he denied saying anything. But there was fear in his eyes I hadn't seen before, not even when raiders were at our door. I had the distinct impression he was still hiding something significant, but before I could press further, a harsh coughing from Ellie's bed drew our attention. The medicine would take time to work, if it worked at all. For now, all we could do was wait and hope. The Weather Service printout I'd found at the pharmacy remained in my pocket, temporarily forgotten in the urgency of treating Ellie. But its implications lingered in my mind. The patterns didn't match natural models. Something else was affecting our climate, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Bellwether knew exactly what it was. Ellie's treatment became our sole focus for the next several days. We administered antibiotics on a strict schedule, monitored her temperature, and took turns sitting with her through the night. The medications we'd recovered from the pharmacy were past their expiration dates, but I hoped they retained enough potency to make a difference. I kept thinking about the permission slips I used to require for field trips. Now I was making life-or-death medical decisions for someone else's child. The absurdity of applying classroom safety protocols to apocalypse survival hit me during hour 20 of Ellie's fever. There was no liability waiver for the end of the world. Bellwether surprised me by taking regular shifts at Ellie's bedside. He wasn't gentle by nature, but he was methodical in monitoring her vital signs and administering medications. During one overnight watch, we had our first real conversation that wasn't about immediate survival. "Why teaching?" he asked unexpectedly, around day 63. "With your knowledge, you could have worked in research or industry." Considered the question. "I wanted to inspire the next generation of scientists, show them how understanding natural principles could help them navigate the world." I gave a bitter laugh. "I guess that part worked out, just not how I imagined." "Your students are alive because of what you taught them," he pointed out. "That's more than most teachers can say right now." It was strangely comforting in a grim way. "What about you?" I asked. "How does someone go from government research to living alone in suburbia with a secret bunker?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "Ethical disagreements with program direction," he finally said. "I developed systems to help people survive. Others wanted to use them differently." "The collectors?" He nodded. "Among others." As Ellie's fever persisted, Bellwether began revealing fragments of his background. During his shifts at her bedside, perhaps needing distraction from the grim vigil, he shared details about classified climate engineering projects he had worked on. "We were trying to counteract warming," he explained on day 66. "Localized, atmospheric modification to redirect jet streams, create pressure systems artificially, small adjustments with cascading effects." "Sounds like playing God," I said. "More like pressing a thumb on the scale," he countered. "The natural systems were already unbalanced by carbon emissions. We were trying to restore equilibrium." His descriptions went far beyond cloud seeding or other publicly known climate interventions. The technology he described could fundamentally alter weather patterns at a regional or even global scale. The implication hung in the air between us. What if this wasn't just bad luck? What if the catastrophic cooling was somehow connected to these interventions? Bellwether never directly confirmed my suspicion, but he didn't deny it either. The volcanic eruptions had suspicious timing. 3. Major events happening simultaneously was statistically improbable, and the resulting cooling was far more severe than models would predict from volcanic activity alone. Have you tried contacting your colleagues? I asked. The ones who worked on these projects with you? Some, through secure channels. He gestured to his communications equipment. Few responses. Those who did respond are scattered, isolated. But not all of them. He glanced at me sharply. No. Before I could press further, Ellie's condition worsened dramatically. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, her fever spiking despite medication. Mrs. Wilson, who had been monitoring her closely, looked up at us with tears in her eyes. "She's not getting enough oxygen," she said. "The infection is spreading despite the antibiotics. All my knowledge, everything I'd spent my life learning, and I couldn't save one teenager from a condition that would have been routinely treated in any hospital before. What was the point of surviving if this was the world we'd inherited?" Bellwether disappeared into a storage area and returned with a small device I hadn't seen before. "Portable oxygen concentrator," he explained, setting it up beside Ellie's bed. Limited runtime, but it might help. Where he had obtained such specialized medical equipment, I didn't ask. It was becoming clear that Bellwether's preparations went far beyond what any ordinary prepper could access. The oxygen seemed to help temporarily, but by day 71, we had a new crisis to manage. Mia, who had been monitoring the security systems, reported movement outside. 6 figures standard pattern search grid, she reported, showing us the thermal imaging feed. Collector protocol. We initiated the blackout procedures Bellwether had drilled us on, shutting down all systems that could be detected from outside, switching to minimal emergency power and maintaining absolute silence. Even Ellie's oxygen concentrator had to be temporarily disconnected. For hours we sat in near darkness, watching thermal signatures move methodically through the neighborhood ruins above us. They were methodical, maintaining regular patrol, patterns, documenting everything they found. These weren't desperate survivors. This was an organized operation with clear objectives, and somehow they'd traced us back from the pharmacy. "They're searching all the houses again," Tyler whispered, "even the ones that have already collapsed." "They're thorough," Bellwether replied. "Standard recovery protocol is 3 complete, sweeps with different team compositions." The casual familiarity with which he described their tactics made me increasingly suspicious about his past involvement with these people. He knew too much about their operations to have been merely adjacent to their program. Eventually, the collectors moved on, but we maintained reduced operations for another full day to ensure they were truly gone. When we finally restored power to all systems, Ellie's condition had deteriorated significantly. Despite the antibiotics, despite the oxygen, despite everything we'd risked to help her, she was slipping away from us. Her breathing was labored, her skin pale with a bluish tinge that indicated insufficient oxygen. We all knew what it meant, even if none of us said it aloud. Tyler refused to leave her side, holding her hand and talking to her about plans for when she got better, projects they would build, places they would explore once the world thawed. Mia calculated and recalculated medication dosages, searching for some combination that might turn the tide. Mrs. Wilson sang soft lullabies while sponging Ellie's forehead. And through it all, I felt the crushing weight of failure. I was supposed to protect these kids. That's what teachers do. We keep our students safe. But here, at the end of the world, all my knowledge couldn't save one girl from pneumonia. On day 76, Ellie passed away quietly in her sleep. Tyler was holding her hand. Mia was checking calculations one more time. Mrs. Wilson was adjusting her blankets. I was staring at a tablet displaying her declining vital signs, and Bellwether was watching us all from the shadows of his workstation. We held an impromptu memorial service in the small living area. Mrs. Wilson said a prayer. Mia recited a poem. Tyler couldn't speak at all. I talked about Ellie's quiet intelligence, her thoughtful questions in class, her kindness to younger students. Throughout it all, Bellwether stood apart, uncomfortable with the emotional display. But when the informal service concluded, he approached me with a decision that would change everything. "I need to show you something," he said. "All of you." He led us to a locked cabinet I'd noticed him checking when he thought others were asleep. From it, he removed a classified folder with government markings. "What I'm about to tell you is technically treason," he began. "But given the circumstances, national security classifications seem rather pointless now." He spread several documents. On the table, technical specifications, climate models, security protocols. But most disturbing were the simulation models showing cascading climate effects. The volcanic eruptions should have caused temporary cooling, yes, but nothing like what we're experiencing, he explained. Our weather modification system had been designed to counter warming, but when combined with the ash clouds, it created a feedback loop no one had modeled. We'd accidentally amplified the cooling effect exponentially. The revelation stunned us all into silence. Bellwether had been part of the team that had inadvertently made a bad situation catastrophically worse. "You're saying this is man-made?" Tyler finally asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "Ellie died because of some science experiment gone wrong?" "It's more complicated than that," Bellwether said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Tyler demanded. "Sounds pretty simple to me. You tried to play God with the weather, and it backfired. Now billions are dead." I placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "The volcanic eruptions would have been catastrophic regardless," I said, trying to process the information myself. "But yes, it appears human intervention made it worse." "Much worse," Bellwether confirmed. "And irreversible. At least through conventional means." The qualification caught my attention. "What do you mean, conventional means?" Bellwether hesitated, then reached back into the cabinet and withdrew a small device about the size of a paperback book. It was clearly technological, but unlike any commercial product I'd seen before. "This is a secure quantum encrypted communication device," he explained. "It connects to a private satellite network that was designed to survive precisely this kind of global catastrophe." "That's how you've been checking in," I realized. "You've been in contact with someone." He nodded. "Former colleagues, those who survived the initial collapse. They've established operational continuity at a facility designated Northern Reserve." "The same Northern Command the collectors mentioned?" Mia asked. "No," Bellwether said firmly. "Similar location, different organization. The facility was designed with redundant command structures in case of compromise. When central authority collapsed, different factions emerged. The collectors represent one approach to continuity. Northern Reserve represents another." "What's the difference?" I asked. "The collectors believe in hierarchical resource control, acquisition of skilled personnel to serve leadership objectives. Northern Reserve operates on collaborative scientific principles, pooling knowledge to address the climate catastrophe." "And you trust these Northern Reserve people?" Mrs. Wilson asked skeptically. "I designed their facility." Bellwether's simple statement carried weight. "And they've been working on a potential solution to accelerate atmospheric recovery." "Recovery?" I repeated. "You mean reversing the cooling?" "Eventually. It's a long-term project, but they have resources we don't. Advanced laboratories, power systems, computing capabilities." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" I demanded, anger finally breaking through my shock. "People died, Bellwether. Ellie died. If there's someplace safer with better resources, why have we been hiding in this hole in the ground?" "Because the journey is nearly impossible," he replied evenly. 50 miles through temperatures that kill in minutes, past collector patrols and desperate survivors, with no guarantee of success even if we reach the facility. "But now you're willing to try?" Mrs. Wilson asked. "Now I have no choice." I gestured to the dwindling supplies, the failing systems. "This bunker was designed for one person to survive 6 months. With 5 of us, we've depleted resources faster than anticipated. Within weeks, critical systems will begin to fail." The revelation hit hard. Our sanctuary wasn't as secure as we'd believed. And there's another factor, Bellwether continued. Ellie's death. The antibiotics failed because they had degraded. Medical supplies have limited shelf life. The next infection will kill someone else, unless we reach a facility with proper medical equipment. He pulled out a detailed map and spread it across the table. The Northern Reserve facility is located here, approximately 50 miles north of our position. They have self-sufficient food production, medical facilities, and most importantly, are working on climate remediation technology. Why would they let us in? Tyler asked, still wrestling with grief and anger. What do we have that they need? This, Bellwether said, pointing to the Weather Service printout I'd found at the pharmacy and subsequently shown him. These anomalous patterns indicate something we didn't anticipate in our models. It could be crucial to their climate restoration work. So we're just trading information for shelter? Mrs. Wilson asked. That's how science works, I interjected. Pooling knowledge, building on each other's discoveries. If they're really working to fix the climate, any new data could be valuable. Bellwether nodded, seemingly relieved that I understood. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into the cabinet a final time. He withdrew a sealed drive. Everything I know about what we did to the climate and how we might fix it is here. Northern Reserve needs this more than anything else we can offer. We spent the rest of the day debating the proposal. The journey would be incredibly dangerous, but staying meant slow starvation or death from the next medical emergency. The frozen wasteland outside was lethal, but our sanctuary was running on borrowed time. In the end, it wasn't really a choice, at all. We would attempt the journey to Northern Reserve. For Ellie, for ourselves, for some shred of hope that the world might eventually thaw. That night, as the others prepared for sleep, I confronted Bellwether at his communication station. There's something you're still not telling us, I said quietly. Something about your involvement in all this. He continued adjusting his equipment, not meeting my eyes. We're all guilty of something, Parker. You failed to save your student. I failed to prevent a global catastrophe. The question is whether we let those failures define what we do next. During Ellie's final hours, you muttered something about Protocol 7 in the Northern facility. I said. What did that mean? He finally looked up, genuine surprise on his face. I said that aloud. Yes. What is Protocol 7? He seemed to debate internally before answering. Insurance, a last resort contingency for precisely this scenario. Atmospheric restoration technology that was deemed too uncertain for deployment, except in extinction-level events. And now? Now it might be our only chance. He switched off his equipment. Get some rest, Parker. The journey ahead will test all of us. Northern Reserve is our best hope, not just for survival, but for eventually restoring a habitable world. As I lay in my bunk that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Bellwether still wasn't telling us everything. His knowledge of the collectors, his secure communications with mysterious colleagues, his access to classified technology, it all pointed to someone who had been much more than a simple government researcher. But with Ellie's death fresh in my mind, I had to focus on what mattered now. If Northern Reserve offered even the slimmest chance of reversing this frozen hell, of creating a world where children like Ellie could live rather than just survive, then it was worth any risk to reach it. My last thought before falling asleep was of my classroom all those months ago, of Casey Williams asking if we were due for another ice age, and my confident answer that it was thousands of years away, of how quickly our certainties can shatter and how science, the very thing I had dedicated my life to teaching, could be both our downfall and our only hope for salvation. Days 81 through 85 were devoted to intense preparation for our journey. The initial despair following Ellie's death gradually transformed into grim determination. If we couldn't save her, we could at least ensure her sacrifice meant something by reaching the Northern Reserve and contributing to their work on climate restoration. Bellwether revealed additional equipment he'd been holding in reserve: advanced cold weather gear, portable power cells, emergency rations designed for extreme conditions. The man had been preparing for this journey all along, I realized. He'd just been waiting for the right moment, or perhaps for us to have no other choice. The facility wasn't built for this specific disaster. It was designed as a scientific continuity site for any extinction-level event. Bellwether had helped design its self-sufficient systems before being reassigned to the Climate Modification Project. The Northern Reserve was built to preserve scientific knowledge and research capacity through any global catastrophe, Bellwether explained as we inventoried supplies. Pandemic, nuclear exchange, asteroid impact, climate collapse, the specific disaster doesn't matter. What matters is maintaining the scientific capability to rebuild. And they accepted you knowing you helped cause this? Tyler asked bluntly, still processing his grief through anger. Bellwether's expression remained neutral. They don't know my full involvement yet. That's part of what I need to deliver in person. The complete data on what went wrong and why. Will they even let us in? Mrs. Wilson asked. Or just take your information and leave us outside? The facility operates on scientific community principles, Bellwether replied. They need people as much as information, especially people with specialized knowledge. He nodded to each of us in turn. A science educator with practical application skills, a mathematical modeling prodigy, a mechanical improvisation specialist, a botanical expert. We're all valuable. I wasn't entirely convinced by his confidence, but the alternative was waiting to die in a failing bunker. At least attempting the journey gave us purpose and hope, however slim. Tyler converted 2 of Bellwether's solar panels into portable units we could use to recharge critical equipment during brief daylight hours. Mrs. Wilson prepared concentrated food packs with maximum caloric density. Mia worked with Bellwether to calculate optimal travel routes based on terrain and weather patterns. We were applying everything we knew about science to solve one problem: surviving 50 miles in unsurvivable conditions. The most dangerous segments will be open terrain, Bellwether explained, showing us the route on his specialized topographic display. We'll need to move quickly through exposed areas and use natural windbreaks where possible. Forest sections provide cover from both elements and observation, but slow our progress. What about collector patrols? I asked. They maintain predictable search patterns, he replied. We can time our movements to avoid the highest risk encounters. By day 86, we could delay no longer. Resources were dwindling, and Bellwether's monitoring equipment showed a brief weather window approaching, a period of merely life-threatening cold rather than instantly fatal temperatures. We packed our specialized sleds with only the most essential supplies: medical equipment, emergency rations, communication devices, and Bellwether's precious data drive. Each of us carried a backpack with personal survival gear. The cold weather suits Bellwether provided were remarkable technological achievements. Multi-layered graphene heating elements powered by flexible battery systems integrated throughout the material. These prototype suits can maintain survivable body temperature for approximately 12 hours in -60 conditions, Bellwether instructed. But they're not invulnerable. Any breach in the outer layer compromises the entire system. Exited through the emergency tunnel at dawn, emerging into a world of blinding whiteness. Despite weeks in the bunker, the shock of the outside temperature was immediate and brutal. The cold attacked any exposed skin with vicious intensity. Even through the advanced suits, I could feel the deadly chill probing for weaknesses. The landscape was completely alien. What had once been suburban Minnesota was now an Arctic wasteland. Houses were merely lumpy protrusions from snowdrifts. Streets were completely buried, identifiable only by the occasional streetlight or sign poking through the white expanse. Navigation required constant reference to Bellwether's specialized GPS system, as all familiar landmarks had vanished beneath the snow. We moved in single file, pulling our supply sleds, speaking only when necessary, to conserve energy and heat. Each breath froze instantly, creating ice crystals on our face shields that had to be regularly cleared. Progress was agonizingly slow through the deep snow, each step requiring significant effort. 6 miles in, we came across an entire field of cars, frozen in what must have been a mass exodus from the city. Hundreds of vehicles, most still containing remains. It was Interstate 35, completely unrecognizable except for fragments of green signs protruding from snowdrifts. "Don't look inside the vehicles," I warned the others, though the ice coating most windows made the grim contents mercifully obscured. "Keep moving." We followed the interstate for several miles as it provided a relatively straight path despite the abandoned vehicles. The elevated roadway also held slightly less snow than the surrounding terrain, making progress marginally easier. Around midday on day 92, Mia spotted unusual patterns in the snow ahead, too regular to be natural drifting. "Those are patrol tracks," Bellwether confirmed after examining them. "Collector movement recent, within the last 12 hours. We altered our course, adding distance but reducing the risk of encounter. The detour took us through a suburban office park, buildings looming like ice sculptures around us. Inside one partially collapsed structure, we took a brief rest to consume emergency rations and adjust equipment. Battery levels at 64%, Bellwether announced after checking his monitoring device. "We're consuming power faster than anticipated due to the terrain difficulty." "How far have we come?" Mrs. Wilson asked, her voice betraying her exhaustion despite her determination. "Just under 12 miles, Bellwether replied. "We need to increase pace if possible." The reality of our situation sank in. 12 miles in almost 2 days of grueling effort. At this rate, we'd never reach the facility before our power and supplies ran out. "There's a more direct route," Bellwether said, studying his map. "Across Phillips Lake. The ice is certainly thick enough to support us, and it would cut nearly 5 miles off our journey." "Ice can be unpredictable," I cautioned, "especially with geothermal variations." "The risk calculation favors attempting the crossing," he insisted. "Our current pace will exhaust supplies before reaching the destination." It was a cold equation, but scientifically sound. We adjusted our route toward the lake. By nightfall, we reached the lake's edge. In the dim twilight, the frozen expanse stretched before us like a vast white plain. We established a minimal camp in the shelter of a boathouse, using our sleds as windbreaks and clustering together for additional warmth. Sleep was nearly impossible in the extreme cold, but we needed to rest. We took shifts monitoring the heating systems and watching for signs of collector activity. During my watch, I noticed Bellwether checking his secure communication device repeatedly. "Any response from Northern Reserve?" I asked quietly. "Intermittent," he admitted. "The satellites are functioning, but ground receivers at the facility may be compromised." "You mean they might not know we're coming?" His expression was unreadable behind his frosted face shield. "They know. Whether they're able to assist with our approach is uncertain." This was far less reassuring than his previous confidence. I wondered what else might prove less certain than he had led us to believe. We set out across the lake at first light. The surface was eerily smooth compared to the drifted terrain we'd been traversing, allowing for significantly improved pace. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that we might actually complete this journey. That hope was short-lived. Halfway across the frozen expanse, Mrs. Wilson spotted movement on the distant shore, the unmistakable white-clad figures of a collector patrol. "They've seen us," Bellwether confirmed grimly. "Formation indicates pursuit protocol activated." "Can we outrun them?" Tyler asked. "Negative. Their equipment is designed for rapid response. Ours prioritizes endurance." "Then what do we do?" Mia demanded. Bellwether made a swift decision. "Change of plan. You four continue on the plotted course. I'll create a diversion to draw them away." "That's suicide," I protested. "It's mathematics," he countered. "One loss to ensure 4 reach the destination. The data is what matters." He handed me the sealed drive we'd discussed earlier. "Everything I know about what we did to the climate, and how we might fix it, is here." Northern Reserve needs this more than they need me. Before any of us could argue further, he detached his sled and began moving perpendicular to our path, heading toward the eastern shore at a deliberately visible pace. 15 degrees north-northwest, he called back. "Maintain that heading, regardless of conditions. The facility perimeter is marked by infrared beacons your suits can detect at half-mile range. We watched in stunned silence as he moved away, deliberately drawing attention. The collector patrol indeed changed course, focusing on him rather than our main group. "We have to keep moving," I finally said, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. Another person, sacrificed so that we might continue. The calculus of survival was brutal. We pressed on, maintaining the heading Bellwether had given us. The relatively easy terrain of the lake soon gave way to forested hills that slowed our progress considerably. As night approached on day 95, the temperature plummeted further, and our suit batteries showed dangerous depletion levels. "We need shelter," I decided as darkness fell. "We can't risk continuing blind in these conditions." We found minimal protection in a rock formation that blocked the worst of the wind. Huddled together to conserve heat, we shared the last of our ready-to-eat rations. No one spoke of Bellwether's fate, but his absence hung heavy in our thoughts. "Do you think the facility is really there?" Tyler finally asked, voice barely audible through his face covering in the howling wind. "Or was it just something to give us hope?" "It's there," I said with more confidence than I felt. "The scientific community would have established continuity protocols. It makes sense." "But will they let us in?" Mia pressed. "We're strangers carrying a drive from someone who might have helped cause all this." It was the question we'd all been avoiding. Bellwether had assured us of welcome, but he'd also kept secrets until they became impossible to maintain. His confidence in Northern Reserve's reception might be equally misplaced. Day 96 brought the worst blizzard yet, reducing visibility to mere feet and driving the effective temperature to deadly levels. Our suits struggled to maintain life-sustaining heat with rapidly depleting power. We moved slowly, staying close enough to remain visible to each other, following Bellwether's, heading with grim determination. By day 97, Mrs. Wilson was struggling visibly, her pace slowing despite her determined efforts. The oldest among us, the journey had taken a greater physical toll on her than the rest. "Leave me," she gasped during a brief rest period. "I'm slowing everyone down." "Not happening," I said firmly. "We stay together." Tyler and I took turns pulling her sled in addition to our own, while Mia continuously recalculated our route to find the path of least resistance. We had become a single organism fighting for collective survival. On the morning of day 98, our suit power reached critical levels. Without recharging, we had perhaps 6 hours before the heating systems failed completely. Death would follow quickly after that. "We've come about 43 miles by my calculations," Mia reported. "We should be approaching the facility perimeter soon if Bellwether's coordinates were accurate." The landscape had changed to rolling hills with scattered evergreens, their branches heavy with snow and ice. We scanned constantly for any sign of the infrared beacons Bellwether had mentioned, but saw nothing but endless white. "There," Tyler suddenly called out, pointing to a subtle regularities in the snow ahead. "Those aren't natural formations." He was right. As we drew closer, I could make out the geometric precision of buried structures, corners too exact, surfaces too flat to be natural features. We had reached some kind of facility, though whether it was Northern Reserve remained to be seen. Our relief was short-lived. Movement in the trees to our right revealed what we had feared. Collector scouts had tracked our path despite Bellwether's diversion. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning our remaining supplies except for Bellwether's precious data drive. "Head for the structures." We ran as best we could through the deep snow, our exhausted bodies protesting every movement. The collectors moved with practiced efficiency, gaining ground with each passing moment. They weren't shooting, I realized. They wanted us alive, technical personnel to be acquired rather than eliminated. As we crested a final ridge, a vast complex spread before us, partially buried under snow but clearly an extensive facility. Massive ventilation systems protruded from the snow, and cleared pathways indicated active maintenance. Northern Reserve was real. But between us and potential safety stood several hundred yards of exposed terrain, with collector scouts closing in from behind. "We need a distraction," I said, thinking rapidly. something to delay them. The emergency flares, Mia suggested, from our survival kits. It was a desperate plan, but our only option. Using my remaining scientific knowledge, I calculated where to place the flares to create a thermal disruption that might confuse the collector's tracking systems. As the others prepared to make the final run to the facility perimeter, I positioned the flares in a pattern that would momentarily overwhelm thermal imaging when ignited. When these go off, run directly for that maintenance hatch, I instructed, pointing to a visible entrance about 200 yards away. Don't stop for anything. What about you? Tyler asked. Right behind you. Just need to time the ignition. With our plan set, I triggered the flares and shouted for the others to run. The brilliant chemical flames created the desired effect, temporarily blinding any thermal imaging systems. My companions raced toward the facility entrance while I followed slightly behind, ensuring they weren't pursued. We had nearly reached the maintenance hatch when I heard the mechanical hum of vehicles approaching from the opposite direction. For a moment, I feared we'd been flanked by additional collector forces. Instead, 2 sleek snowmobiles emerged from a concealed garage in the facility, personnel in gray cold-weather gear racing toward our position. Northern Reserve Security, one called through an amplified speaker. Identify yourselves. Reed Parker, I shouted back. Science teacher, we have critical climate data from Thaddeus Bellwether. The security team reached us just as the collectors began to emerge from the thermal disruption I'd created. Weapons were raised on both sides, creating a tense standoff. These people are under Northern Reserve protection, the security leader announced to the collectors. Withdraw immediately. For a tense moment, I thought conflict was inevitable. Then, surprisingly, the collector team backed away, disappearing into the trees with practiced discipline. Inside, the security leader instructed us. Quickly. We were ushered through the maintenance hatch into a decontamination chamber, then through a series of security checkpoints. Our nearly depleted suits were removed and replaced with clean facility clothing. Medical personnel immediately began assessing our condition, particularly Mrs. Wilson, who was showing signs of hypothermia despite the protective gear. When that blast door opened on day 99, revealing a corridor of electric lights and the warmth of a functioning climate system, I felt something I thought had frozen permanently. Hope. But it wasn't the technology that moved me to tears. It was seeing other children, other teachers, other scientists. Fragments of the world we'd lost, preserved. The facility was vast, far larger than Bellwether had implied. Multiple levels extended deep underground, housing research laboratories, living quarters, educational spaces, and extensive hydroponics operations. Several hundred people moved purposefully through the complex, all engaged in what appeared to be highly organized work. After medical clearance and initial debriefing, we were assigned temporary quarters and allowed to rest. For the first time in months, I slept in a real bed, in a temperature-controlled room without fear of freezing to death before morning. On day 100, we were summoned to meet with the facility leadership. A woman introduced as Dr. Eleanor Chen, Chief Science Officer, interviewed us extensively about our journey and, more importantly, about Bellwether. He sacrificed himself to ensure we made it here, I explained, handing over the data drive he had entrusted to me. He said this contains critical information about the climate modification project and potentially how to reverse some effects. Dr. Chen examined the drive carefully. Thaddeus was one of our original design engineers, she confirmed. We've been attempting to contact him since the catastrophe began. He mentioned Protocol 7, I said, watching her reaction closely, and something about atmospheric restoration technology. Her expression remained carefully neutral. We'll need to analyze his data before discussing next steps. Is he alive? Tyler asked bluntly. Bellwether. The collectors were after him specifically. We don't know, Dr. Chen admitted, but Thaddeus has proven remarkably difficult to kill in the past. Later that day, we were given a tour of the facility's key areas. The hydroponics section was particularly impressive. Vast chambers of thriving plants providing food for the entire population. Power came from geothermal sources deep beneath the facility, ensuring sustainable operation indefinitely. Most striking was the Atmospheric Research Laboratory, where dozens of scientists worked with sophisticated equipment monitoring global weather patterns. Large displays showed data streams that I recognized as similar to the anomalous patterns on the weather service printout I'd found at the pharmacy. They showed me their atmospheric models on day 100, I explained to my small group later. The volcanic ash was beginning to disperse. It would take years, maybe decades, but there was a path back to a habitable world. And now, with, Bellwether's data on what went wrong, we might even accelerate the recovery. Our role at the facility quickly became clear. My background in science, education made me valuable for training younger residents and integrating new arrivals. Mia's mathematical abilities earned her a place with the climate modeling team. Tyler's mechanical aptitude was directed toward equipment maintenance. Mrs. Wilson's botanical knowledge was welcomed by the hydroponics division. We were useful, we had purpose, and for the first time since the world froze, we had genuine hope. On the evening of day 100, as we gathered in our shared common area to reflect on our journey, a security alert sounded throughout the facility. Curious, we made our way to the main entrance in time to witness a remarkable arrival. A medical team rushed out with a stretcher to meet a group of security personnel returning from patrol. On the stretcher, severely frostbitten, but unmistakably alive, was Thaddeus Bellwether. Incredibly stubborn man, Dr. Chen commented, appearing beside me. Somehow evaded collector capture, followed his own route here. Nearly died 3 times according to initial medical assessment. Will he recover? I asked. Physically, yes, mostly. Some extremity damage. Mentally? She shrugged. Thaddeus always was complicated. After Bellwether was rushed to medical, Dr. Chen took me aside for a private conversation. The facility director pulled me aside after my debriefing. There's something else you should know, she said. There are others out there with different ideas about what kind of world should emerge from the ice. The collectors are just foot soldiers. This struggle is far from over. I understood then that reaching Northern Reserve wasn't the end of our journey, but merely the beginning of a new chapter. The world hadn't ended. It had changed, and now we needed to change with it. I'm recording this not just as a record of what happened, but as a beacon. If you're out there, if you have knowledge that could help rebuild, there are others like you. The world didn't end, it changed, and now we need to change with it. This isn't the end of our story. It's barely the beginning. The Ice Age didn't kill humanity. It forced us to evolve. And from what I've seen in these first 100 days, we might just emerge stronger than before. If you're watching this and you're still out there, don't give up. Science will find a way. We will find a way.